The word is marmalade, and it's spelt M-A-R-M-A-L-A-D-E. The word originates in Portuguese. It comes from Portuguese marmalade, which in turn comes from the word marmelo, which is the word for a quince, and that's a fruit. Marmalade was originally, and indeed in Portugal today still is, a kind of thick, very sweet paste or gel made from boiled up quinces and sugar, and sometimes flavoured with spices. It's served as a sweetmeat or as a dessert, cut into cubes and served with cheese, and usually with coffee, or sometimes served with wine, particularly dessert wines. Why, if the word comes from the Portuguese word for quince, do we think of marmalade today as a jam that's always made from citrus fruit? Oranges, lemons, limes, grapefruits, most often from these. This is a Seville orange, and most of the world's marmalade is produced using these. Marmalade is made from the whole of the fruit, including the rind, which is, in its raw state, is completely inedible. It's very tough and it's very bitter. And the juice is extremely tart. You wouldn't want to peel this and separate the segments and eat them. It's almost impossible to eat, it's so sour. But when you boil it slowly in sugar, having cut the rind up into fine shreds, the rind slowly caramelizes and you end up with a sort of dense, rich preserve with a very intense, very refreshing bittersweet flavour that makes marmalade a particular favourite as a breakfast food. It's a good way to wake you up at the start of the day. The word itself in English was first recorded in the late 15th century as a sort of anglicisation of the Portuguese as marmelado. At that time it referred to the quince paste, which was a very prestigious luxury product. It had to be very expensive because sugar was an extremely rare and expensive commodity. It was the Portuguese who first developed a large-scale sugar production. In the early years, the fruit preserve would be made in a decorative mould that would usually have some kind of design on the surface. It's in the course of the 17th century the word marmalade comes to be used to refer more exclusively to fruit preserves made from oranges, and particularly from the bitter oranges that are used for most marmalade production today. So how did it come to be this sort of mass market commodity, something that is so widely associated with a traditional British breakfast and is the delight of even people as ordinary as Paddington Bear, the book and TV character who was obsessed with marmalade and used to keep marmalade sandwiches in his briefcase wherever he went? Well, it has to do with the changing manner of production, both of the sugar and of the oranges, and also the manner in which they could be transported. Sugar became more widely available in Britain, at least in the course of the 18th century, as British colonialists, particularly in the Caribbean, muscled the Portuguese and Brazilian sugar magnates out of the market and started to provide a very steady and affordable supply of sugar for Britain and its empire. Well, I say affordable for the middle classes. And I think we should bear in mind that this is a very dark or rather shameful part of the story of both of marmalade and of Britain, because of course all of this sugar was being produced at the end of the day by slaves. That use of slave labour meant that sugar became much more widely available, and that products such as jams that were made that relied on sugar came within the reach of ever-increasing numbers of people. Meanwhile, there were of course changes in shipping technology, which meant that volumes of produce could be shipped around the world much more cheaply, but also much more quickly, and this meant that the oranges themselves could be shipped to Britain for the marmalade to be made on an industrial scale back in Britain. What's happening by the early 19th century? The early 19th century is the time when the first of the brand names that we associate with marmalade, and indeed with other fruit jams, start to go into production. And marmalade production is particularly associated from this time with Scottish cities, in particular Dundee and the Keeler family, but also in England with Oxford, the Frank Cooper family, and with Manchester, where there are a number of significant jam making firms. It's a bit of a sad end to the story of what was once such a highly prized luxury product, that today the marmalade producers are facing a bit of a crisis with constantly falling sales and constantly shrinking market share. Their conclusion is that marmalade today has something of an image problem, and it kind of has this rather sort of fuddy-duddy, sort of stuffy English middle class kind of image to it. But it's kind of strange that marmalade has this stuffy image today. First of all, because of the nature of the product itself, that it's got such an intense flavour that really sort of whacks your taste buds around and wakes you up in the morning. But also because it's also been associated with something very sensuous and a bit sexy. There's a Portuguese expression, estar na marmelada, to be in the marmalade, I suppose literally, which means to be, it's kind of like, you know, kind of getting it on, or, you know, a bit of hanky-panky, or being a bit naughty in a sort of romantic way, making out. If you think in particular about the 1973 song by the Labelles featuring Patti LaBelle, Lady Marmalade, covered for the film Moulin Rouge in 2001 by an all-star cast. That's a very raunchy song set in New Orleans, and it's about the sex trade in New Orleans. Lady Marmalade is, she describes herself as Creole. The key phrase is in French, Voulez-vous coucher avec moi ce soir? I won't translate that. It also has these associations with different types of pleasure, and with something that's definitely not fuddy-duddy or stuffy at all. So what we think of as a great British breakfast is actually a jam made from oranges that won't grow here, that are grown in countries like Portugal, that has a word which comes from Portuguese because it was a product that the Portuguese first traded with England, and which we drink with tea, which also found its way into British life thanks to the Portuguese. Tea at that time was again a luxury product, very difficult to transport, very expensive. But tea followed the same process of popularisation as sugar or marmalade did, and so by the 19th century had become a universal drink, very popular with the working classes as much as with the upper classes. That's how we end up with people like me being able to drink my tea and eat my marmalade.